I found a treehouse deep in the woods behind my house. What I found inside made my skin crawl. When I was 11, my family moved into a house that backed up to a stretch of woods. Nothing too dense, just a few acres of trees and undergrowth that eventually connected to a state park. My parents were fine with me exploring as long as I stayed within shouting distance of the house. I loved it back there. I'd spend hours just walking through the woods, climbing trees, building forts out of fallen branches. It felt like my own private world. About 3 weeks after we moved in, I found the treehouse. It was deep in the woods, maybe a quarter-mile from my backyard, built into a massive oak tree. It wasn't a fancy treehouse, just a wooden platform about 15 feet up with walls made of scrap plywood and a tarp for a roof. It also had a rope ladder that hung from one side. I was excited at first. I figured some kids from the neighborhood had built it years ago and forgotten about it. I grabbed the rope ladder to climb up, but the wood was rotten and the ropes were frayed. The boards of the platform looked old and warped. This thing had been here for a long time. I climbed up carefully, testing each rung before putting my weight on it. When I pulled myself onto the platform, I could see the whole structure was barely holding together. There were gaps between the boards, rusty nails sticking out everywhere, and the tarp roof was full of holes. But it looked like someone had been here recently. There was a blanket in the corner, and it was relatively clean. There was also a plastic water bottle that was still half full, and a notebook, the kind that you used for school, and it was sitting in the middle of the floor. I picked up the notebook and opened it. The first page had my name written on it. Not just once. Over and over, filling the entire page. My full name, in handwriting I didn't recognize. I flipped to the next page. There was a drawing of a house. It was my house. It was drawn from the perspective of the woods, from exactly where the treehouse was. The next page had another drawing. It was me, standing in my backyard. I recognized the shirt I was wearing. It was the same one I'd worn 2 days earlier. I kept flipping. Page after page of drawings. Me walking to the bus stop, me sitting in my room visible through the window, me playing in the woods, all drawn from a distance, like someone had been watching me. The last page that had anything on it was dated yesterday. It just said, "He's getting closer to the treehouse." I dropped the notebook and looked around. The treehouse had a clear view of my backyard and my bedroom window. Someone had been sitting up here, watching me, drawing me, for weeks. I grabbed the rope ladder to climb down as fast as I could, and that's when I saw them. Scratches on the tree trunk, right next to the platform. Fresh scratches, like someone had been carving into the bark with a knife. They formed words. "Don't leave." I didn't use the ladder. I just jumped, landed hard, and ran. I didn't stop until I was in my backyard. I told my parents everything. My dad didn't believe me at first. Said I was probably imagining things or misinterpreting kids' drawings, but my mom insisted that we checked it out together. So the three of us went back into the woods. We all walked to where I remember the treehouse being, but it was gone. Not torn down, not collapsed, just gone. The massive oak tree was still there, but there was no platform, no rope ladder, no structure at all, not even nails in the trunk where it would have been attached. My dad thought I was making it up, or maybe that I'd got confused about which tree it was, but I knew. I knew exactly where it had been. We searched the area for over an hour. We found nothing. No treehouse, no notebook, no blanket or water bottle, nothing. But when we got back to the house and went inside, I looked out my bedroom window toward the woods, and I saw someone standing at the tree line. They were just standing there, too far away to make out any features. It was just a dark figure, watching the house. I blinked, and they were gone. I never went into those woods alone again, and for months afterwards, I kept my curtains closed at night. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching my window, drawing pictures of me in that notebook. My parents eventually convinced me that it was my imagination, that I probably found an old abandoned fort and my mind filled in the scary details. But I know what I saw in that notebook. I know what was written on that tree. And sometimes, late at night, I'll look out my window toward the woods, and I swear I see a faint light up in the trees, like someone is sitting in that treehouse that isn't there anymore, watching my house in the dark. The voice sounded exactly like my grandma, but she was upstairs when it called my name from behind that door. When I was younger, I visited my grandparents' house all the time. They lived in a single-story house with an unfinished basement. The house was only about 6 years old at the time, relatively new, but I never liked going down to that basement. It felt wrong somehow, too small for how big the space actually was. There was a storage room down there, just a small door in the corner. I always got a horrible feeling whenever I went near it. Even at 6 or 7 years old, I knew to avoid that door. One afternoon, my grandma asked me to help her with something in the basement. I didn't want to go, but I followed her down there anyway. We were down there for maybe 5 minutes when the doorbell rang upstairs. My grandma told me she'd be right back. She knew how I felt about being down there alone, but I nodded and said okay. The second she left, that bad feeling came back. It settled deep in my stomach, heavy and cold. I stood perfectly still in the middle of the basement, not wanting to move. The lights started flickering. Then I heard noises. Faint at first, like someone talking. It wasn't coming from upstairs. It was coming from that storage room. Then I heard my name. The voice sounded exactly like my grandma's. I was confused because I knew she was upstairs. I could hear her footsteps on the floor above me. But that voice calling my name was coming from behind the storage room door. I didn't want to move. Every instinct told me to stay where I was. But I was curious, and the voice kept calling. It sounded so much like her, and it sounded like she needed help. I started walking toward the door, and the closer I got, the worse the feeling became. My chest felt tight. My hands were shaking. When I finally reached the door, the lights went out. Complete darkness. I couldn't see anything. I wanted to run upstairs, but I was frozen. Then I heard my name again, my grandma's voice, asking me to open the door, asking me to help her. So I did. I opened the door. I couldn't see anything at first. It was pitch black inside the storage room. Then I heard laughing, faint and distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. It went on for what felt like forever. Then the laughing stopped. The basement lights turned back on. I felt a little better with the lights on, but now I could see into the storage room. Not everything, just enough. There was a clown doll sitting on the floor, a small porcelain doll with painted eyes and a frozen smile. My grandma hates clowns. She's terrified of them. She would never keep anything like that in her house, let alone in the basement. Then the storage room light turned on. The walls were covered in red. It looked like blood. It was everywhere. I screamed, then everything went black. The next thing I remember, I was lying on the couch upstairs. My grandma was standing over me, asking if I was okay. She said she found me at the bottom of the basement stairs. She said I must have fallen and hit my head. I never told her what I saw in that storage room. I didn't know how to explain it. I still don't. I've thought about that day a lot over the years. I've tried to convince myself it was a dream or a hallucination from hitting my head, but I remember every detail so clearly. The flickering lights, the voice calling my name, the doll, the red on the walls. I never went into that basement again, not once. And my grandparents moved out of that house a few years later without ever giving a reason why. I still don't know if what I saw was real, but I know one thing for certain. Whatever was behind that door knew my name, and it knew exactly how to get me to open the door. The flashlight died while I was alone in that crawl space, and that's when I heard the breathing. When I was 13, we lived in an old ranch house built in the 1960s. The house sat on a crawlspace foundation instead of a full basement, just a 3-foot gap between the ground and the floor joists. It was accessible through a small wooden door on the side of the house. My dad hated going under there. He'd always make excuses whenever something needed to be checked. It was too tight, or his back hurt, or he was claustrophobic. So when we were hearing dripping sounds in the winter, he made me go down there to check the pipes. I didn't want to. The crawl space always felt really creepy to me. Even walking past that little wooden door on the outside of the house made my skin crawl, but my dad insisted. He said that I was small enough to move around down there and it would only take 5 minutes. My dad opened the crawlspace door and handed me a flashlight. The opening was maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, just big enough for me to squeeze through. Just look for any leaking pipes, he said. If you see water, come right back up. I crawled in on my hands and knees. The ground was dirt and gravel, cold and damp. The ceiling was so low that I had to stay on my stomach in some places. I could see the underside of the house. All the wooden beams and the pipes were running overhead. My flashlight beam swept across the space as I crawled forward. It was bigger than I expected. The crawl space ran the entire length of the house, maybe 60 feet, with support beams every 10 feet or so. There were no leaks that I could see, but as I was about to turn back, I noticed something in the far corner where my flashlight couldn't quite reach. A dark shape. I crawled closer, pushing through the tight space between support beams. The shape became clearer. It was a pile of something. Fabric, maybe, or blankets. Then I saw the scratches on the wooden beam next to it. Deep gouges in the wood. Dozens of them. Clustered together in groups. 4 vertical lines with a diagonal slash through them, like someone was counting or tallying something. I must have seen over 100 marks. I swept my flashlight over the pile of fabric. It wasn't blankets. It was clothing. Old, dirty clothing. And it was piled up like someone had been living down here. And next to that pile was a rusted can with something dark and dried inside of it. My heart started pounding. I needed to get out. I turned around to crawl back toward the entrance, and that's when my flashlight died. Now I was in complete darkness. I'd never experienced darkness like that before. Underground, enclosed, no windows, no light from anywhere. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. I stayed completely still, trying not to panic. I knew the entrance was behind me. I just had to crawl straight back the way I came. Then I heard breathing. Not mine, someone else's. It was slow and raspy, coming from somewhere in the crawl space with me. I started crawling back as fast as I could, scraping my knees and elbows on the gravel, not caring about the pain. I could hear something moving in the darkness, not crawling, but dragging, like something was pulling itself across the ground. I kept moving, feeling my way in the pitch black, my breath coming in short gasps. The dragging sound was getting closer. I could hear fingernails scraping against the dirt and the gravel. My hand finally hit the wooden door frame. I scrambled through the opening and fell out onto the grass outside. My dad was standing there, looking annoyed.
Took you long enough. Did you find the leak?
I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. He looked at me closer, and his expression changed.
Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost.
I told him there was someone living down there. Someone who'd been there for a long time, judging by all the marks on the beams. He didn't believe me at first, but I convinced him to go look down there with a better flashlight. He crawled in, and he came back about 5 minutes later, pale and quiet. He closed the crawl space door, and he nailed it shut. Then he nailed boards across it. He called someone the next day. I don't know who. A contractor maybe, or the police. I wasn't allowed to listen to the conversation. But that afternoon, 2 men in masks went into the crawl space with lights and equipment. They were down there for over an hour. When they came out, they talked to my dad privately. I heard fragments of the conversation through my bedroom window. Words like remains and how long and sealed up. We moved out 2 months later. My dad never explained why, but I knew. Whatever had been living under our house, it died down there at some point. But something about those tally marks bothered me more than anything. It wasn't counting days. The marks were in groups of 5, 4 scratches and a slash, over and over. I think it was counting people. Every person who'd gone down into that crawl space over the years. And when I was down there in the dark, hearing that dragging sound getting closer, I think it was about to add one more mark.